I want to create myself a new goal. In 2025, I want to create a new type of video that I would really enjoy making. I personally focus on gaming content, and I have had an idea floating around in my head now for years. I just haven't had the time or the effort to make it. But I think now I can, and finally want to. With the announcement and release of pre-orders for the Analog 3D, I think it's finally time to tackle the task I have been wanting to do. Tackle the entire Nintendo 64 American library and give every single game released for the system a go. This is going to be an extremely difficult and time-consuming task, but I will be able to make it as long as I don't overdo it on myself. The Nintendo 64 is one of my favorite consoles of all time, and actually the first game controller I ever held. I've had my own for a while now, and I have dabbled in it from time to time with games I could get my hands on, but with the Analog coming out and my pre-order secured, I think now is better than ever to begin this goal. I want to do this in release order chronologically, as I feel that makes the most sense, and I won't be completing every game 100% at all, just enough to try it out, get a feel for it, and if I'm really into it, giving a go to finish the game as I play through. There are a few games I definitely want to finish in the series, but for some games like Batman or Superman and stuff like that, it just really isn't possible to do so. So I don't want to give myself an undoable task. But anyway, let's get into it with the first game ever released chronologically. Pilotwings 64. You guys might have been thinking about the other launch title, the absolute classic that is still played through to this day, huh? Well, even in chronological order, we have to go alphabetically, and P is before S, so this is technically the first game to release if we go that way. Anyway, Pilotwings 64 is one of the two launch titles for the Nintendo 64, which is a flight simulation video game, which I've never dabbled in and have never personally checked out. But with an 80 score on Metacritic, I knew it was definitely a game I should give a go to, and that day is today. Pilotwings 64 is a sequel to the SNES game of the same name minus the 64. Back then, as a launch title for the SNES, it used that console's abilities for something called Mode 7, which pretty much created a 3D space using 2D textures. Pilotwings 64 continues this culture of showcasing what the console it's currently on is capable of creating. Pilotwings gameplay consists of 3 different types of vehicles to choose from: a hand glider, a rocket belt, which is pretty much just a jetpack, and a gyrocopter. Each of these have their own control scheme, which brings honestly a lot of variance to the gameplay. When you choose what you want to use, you get the choice of 6 different characters: Lark, Kiwi, Goose, Ibis, Hawk, and Robin. I'm personally Hawk main, so I went ahead and used him. As you get into the game, you can see that you have 3 beginners classes for each of the vehicles, which introduces you to what is at hand for each of them. Also, each of them contain like a hint video that shows exactly how to complete the stage and what buttons to press as you go for the goal. The hand glider, the first vehicle, is a fully momentum-based vehicle. For example, you can't really press A to go faster, which makes sense in a simulation type of game, and you kind of have to just rely on your own flight control and try not to lose too much speed as you go through. You usually have to go through rings and then land on a target for the hand glider. In my first attempt, I actually crashed out, not knowing I needed to actually try to land with my feet coming out. However, on my next attempt, I was able to get 99 points out of 100, which gave me that motivation needed to know that I could be the absolute best at this game. The next vehicle, the jetpack, is definitely a lot harder to control, which is a bit upsetting, honestly. With the A button, you get a huge boost of momentum in the way that your thumbstick is pushed. B is a little bit of momentum, but not as much, and Z locks you in place pretty much. The main goal of the jetpack is to hit targets and land with precision and to not break your legs as you land, which I definitely did on my first attempt. However, I still had enough points to complete this goal and move on to the final vehicle for the beginner class, the gyrocopter. For the gyrocopter, this one is different from the other two and actually feels like a really good helicopter game, if that makes sense. Like, if you took out the GTA helicopter and removed the LNR controls to like mess with the sharp tuning, this is pretty much the same thing. It actually took me a few tries for this one, as A does give you extra speed and B does slow you down, but I didn't realize that at first and ended up smacking straight into the concrete. However, I finally was able to get this one finished, albeit a little bit rough on the landing. As you complete all 3 of the beginner challenges, you are free now to focus on one vehicle at a time and complete Class A, B, and then the pilot class for each of them. However, in my own opinion, this game gets a pretty significant spike in difficulty once you hit this point of Class A. Once you start this class, each challenge gets another test that you have to complete, so 2 tests in total, which I didn't realize at first. For the jetpack, the first of the 2 challenges is just a small section of the city where you have to go through the rings and then land at the end. I'm not gonna lie, this one was actually really hard, and out of a total of 100 points, after about 10 attempts, my high was only 69. The biggest issue with this game, once we get to this point, is the camera. It is way too zoomed in on your character, and with no dedicated second stick, there isn't a reliable way to look around and make the precise movements necessary to hit the targets that at this point are now moving like back and forth a bit. And after a few tries trying to get higher than a 69 and not knowing about the second test and being confused on how to get 140 points on a 100-point total challenge, I decided to make the switch to the hand glider and hope that this was a little bit easier. The hand glider's first challenge for this class calls for you to make it from point A to point B. Pretty simple, while also capturing a photo of a smokestack that's in between these 2 points. Not the hardest challenge in the world, and you can spam all 6 pictures to try and get the best point total out of the bunch. Not much else to say other than the landing is still very difficult. I was able to get 81 points though on my second attempt. The biggest issue of this is not really knowing how your picture is going to come out. It takes a picture like in front of your vehicle, but you can't see that, so you're kind of just having to rely on being able to figure out what it's supposed to look like and where the front of your vehicle is, which is a little bit difficult, but this challenge in altogether is pretty simple. Before moving on to the gyrocopter, I actually tried out the free flight mode, which is honestly a sick addition to this game. Here comes the technical part of this video. The fact that the first game for the Nintendo 64 had an entire world to explore, and you could do a lot of it in free flight mode, is amazing. Being able to see these things that really weren't possible on video game consoles at the time must have been a trip. I know that we had Pilotwings for the SNES, but seeing this in like a 3D space and you controlling like everything and being able to look around with a camera, that must have been an amazing experience. I was only able to fly around this map, but there are multiple maps within this game as I completed different challenges, and I know that if you are able to complete every challenge and go through, you're going to be able to fly around pretty much every level, which I think is awesome. Anyway, after crashing out in the free flight mode, I took on the first test in the gyrocopter vehicle class. Pretty much just going through rings and making it back to the runway. Literally no issues, and honestly the gyrocopter ended up being my favorite of the 3 classes by this point, with its ease of use and honestly a great control scheme. After this, I realized that there were 2 tests, and in the second test of the gyrocopter, it's just to destroy 3 targets using the mounted rocket launcher on it, which is actually pretty hilarious that this is in this flight simulation game. I really appreciate the simplicity of this. I could easily see this specific part of the game becoming like a gyrocopter dogfighting series that Nintendo could have continued and developed. But sadly, we saw this series hit its end in 2011, which I'll go into a little bit later. After this, I tried a couple more challenges, and one specific one where you have to dive bomb using the hand glider, which is pretty sick to be honest. A jetpack one where you have to land on the platforms as you go through the level, and then another gyrocopter test where you have to get through like a river run maze race thing. But I actually personally called it quits at this point in the game. Not that I think it's awful. It's just that I felt I was able to see all that I needed to see at this point in the game. For each of these games that I do play through, I am going to rank them as they come out. This one is going to be tied for both first and last simultaneously, but that will change as we move on to the next game. When it comes to Pilotwings 64, I think that this game is definitely very middling, I want to say. I would not call it one of the best games on the console, but I would not call it the worst either. It definitely has its place as a showcase of what the N64 can do, and does feature some pretty interesting gameplay. But we've definitely seen better for each of these three vehicles by this point in 2024. Like I mentioned before, the GTA helicopter is pretty much just the gyrocopter controls. The hand gliders that were featured in Breath of the Wild are definitely a little bit better than the hand gliders in this game. And Outer Wilds has a great jetpack part of the game that honestly is leaps and bounds better than this. That doesn't mean that this game is going to be on the same tier as those games at all. They were completely made for different purposes. This one is a challenge game where you kind of just testing yourself to see what you can do. But it's not something that I want to sink hours into learning the control scheme and everything like that in 2025. Pilotwings sadly has pretty much come to an end when it comes to a series. The first one was the Pilotwings that came out on the SNES in 1991. This one came out in 1996 as a launch title as well for the Nintendo 64. And the next release we saw in this series was not until 2011 when Pilotwings Resort released. This was a combination of both Pilotwings and Wii Sports Resort. It did use the same exact 3 vehicle classes as you went through. It probably featured more challenges. I personally didn't play this game, but it definitely was kind of showcasing what the Nintendo 3DS is able to do. We also did see the Pilotwings stage in Super Smash Bros., as well as the jetpack in the game as an item. But that right now is pretty much everything to do with Pilotwings up until this point. And it doesn't really look like Nintendo is going to be doing anything with this game series from this point forward. We have different types of games that showcase what consoles are able to do, such as games like, I'm not even kidding when I say like 1-2 Switch and similar things that have been able to come out as like launch titles. Mainly even Mario at this point, Mario Odyssey, Breath of the Wild. Those are easily able to showcase what these consoles are able to do and keep them contained into a game that you don't have to like purchase separately, if that makes sense. So realistically, there's not really room for a game to showcase this type of stuff anymore. If they were able to expand this to have a kind of a world for Pilotwings to exist in other than just as a technical showcase, it could have, but that's obviously opening a can of worms that I'm not really wanting to open, you know what I mean? Like, I think this game was good for what it had, and I think that this Nintendo 64 release is decent but middling in comparison to the rest of the library. But yeah, what do you guys think of Pilotwings 64? Did you play it when you were younger or came back to it later on? Let me know down below, as I'd love to hear your opinion on it. Leave a like as well if you got to this point, and I will see you guys hopefully in the next video, which here's a little teaser of the next game.